let's get started. So, lots of fun. I've been having some side conversations that the rest of you aren't seeing. So, but we'll get into that. Want to welcome you to today's program, Gamification of Learning. Here's the thing, I want to assure you that you are in the right place if you are the type of business professional, let's say somebody who wants to be the better, higher rated, consistently more effective trainer, teacher, instructional designer, or human resource professional, or if you're the type of professional who wants to make sure this never happens again. All right. If you've ever looked out over your audience and you've seen that face, you know what I'm talking about. So, really quickly, my name is Jonathan Peters. I've spent almost the last 2 decades studying why people do what they do. So, what motivates us to make decisions, to take an action? And I'm actually an old professor. And so, I don't know if you've noticed, but as the years pass, college students keep getting younger. Have you noticed this? So back in 2008, I decided it was time to begin to train adults, to work with professionals. And so I went out there and I joined up with this company that created seminars, and then they could send me around the United States. And I can still remember my first webinar, or my first seminar that I gave. Get this, it was a business grammar seminar for 74 people in Bakersfield, California. All right, there's a lot wrong with that sentence. All right, so let's work it backwards. If you're from Bakersfield, California, I'm sorry, but for everybody else, do not put Bakersfield on your bucket list, all right, of places to visit before you die. 74 people is a lot of people for being a first-time presenter for a full day seminar with a microphone and business grammar. Are you kidding me? All right. Hey, if you love grammar, put a 1 in the chat bar. Let's see who the grammar geeks are. If you hated grammar when you were in high school, put a 0. Okay, if that grammar class, English class. All right, we got some grammar geeks going. Look at all that. Good ones. Finally, some zeros. Good. Well, you guys are a little nerdier than most audiences. So I was standing up there and delivering this presentation. I looked out over the audience at 9:45, and this is what I saw. 74 versions of this throughout the audience. And because, see, what I didn't realize is that while I was a popular professor, my students had to listen to me. Their grades were literally in my hands, and I was doing what they expected. I was giving dry, boring lectures. But now that I was speaking to business professionals, it was a whole nother matter. And that's what brought me to gamification and ultimately to our company, Sententia, because I wanted to know how to entice learners to a learning program. Wanted to figure out how to engage them once they were in the learning program, and then finally to encourage them to take what they were learning and actually apply it to the real world, in the case their professional lives. So that's a little bit about me. Here's what we're going to cover here in the next 55 minutes is want to first of all, I'll give you a clear understanding of what gamification can do, can achieve for your learning programs. I'm going to quickly summarize for you the 5 essential steps you should take to develop a professionally gamified program, a successful gamified program, a practical method for approaching gamification in your organization, and importantly, 4 major mistakes to avoid when planning your gamification strategy. So I have a lot to share in a short period of time. I will be talking at a fast rate, as you've already noticed. You should be able to handle that in your part of the world. But feel free to interrupt me. I do fairly well with checking the chat box, especially as we have questions along the way. I'll remind you, get those questions especially toward the end of the webinar, as you would expect. All right, but that's enough here. Let's talk about you. So I'm curious about your level of knowledge and experience with gamification. So we're just going to do a quick Likert scale here to let me know your familiarity with gamification. If you have gamified a program, and by that I mean done more than just put in some games like a Jeopardy game or something, but fully gamified is a 4. A 3 is technical knowledge. You've gone through a webinar, some sort of training. 2, you've learned about, and then 1, we got a bunch of 1s already. You've heard the term. All right, so we got a 3.5. We have some 3s, a few 1s, a 2, thanks. 3, 3, 3, 1. I got a 4. Great, Tom. And a 1, and got a bunch of you. Okay, so got in second 4, Heather. So good, got a bunch of you. That's good. 5, 6, 7. Great. So here's what we want to do. So just to demonstrate the process here, I have something I want you to do. Okay, so I have a goal for this webinar. I want it to be more interactive. I don't want you just sitting here having this in the background. So I'm going to use certain game mechanics to encourage you to become involved in the program. What I want to do is create a badging system. Okay, so if, and you can still do this because this was a little bit of a surprise, you can still put your numbers in there, because if you did put a number in there, you get a badge, the Gamification Explorer badge. And so throughout the webinar, we'll be collecting different badges. And there's my email address, bighead@sententiagames.com. So what you could do is, as you collect these badges, you can take screenshots if you want. You could just draw pictures if you want. You could even just make little tick marks as you go through. So just keep track of how many badges you get. And at the end of the webinar, you'll email me and tell me how many badges you got. And if you have proof, show me the proof. All right. Now, for some of you, just collecting badges is fun, and that's enough. But for others of you, you're saying right now, well, what do I do with the badges? Why would I just be collecting? So collecting badges isn't enough. And so for you, for all of you actually, what we'll do is, if you stay with us till the end, everyone on this webinar has a chance for 2 hours of gamification consultation with Monica Cornetti. Monica is the founder of Sententia. She's very well known in the gamification community. For instance, Training Magazine just came to her specifically to see if we could have a gamification conference for the L&D community with co-located with their e-learning program in October. So fairly well known in the field, and more importantly for you perhaps is she will be leading a gamification certification with the Cascadia ATD chapter on January 19. Okay, so there's the winning side of things. You have the opportunity to win, but again, that might not be enough for you. So here's the other one. You could lose this option if you do not earn at least 4 badges during our time here together. All right, so keep track of your badges. Let me know how it goes, and let's jump into it. So let's start with a definition. If you go out there, if you Google gamification, you'll see there's lots of different definitions. So the one that we like to use here is gamification is motivation design. Okay, there's a little bit more here, but I wanted to pause here and say that if you ever have a resistance, when you're trying to make better programs, more interactive, engaging programs, and you go to the people who control the money or the higher up people, and you say, we want to do some gamification, and they say, no, we're serious people doing serious work. All right, or we don't play games around here. And so if you change it, instead of saying gamification, if you use the term motivation design, they get excited about that. Okay, so just change the word if you ever have resistance. Anyway, gamification is motivation design. It deconstructs games, okay, so deconstructs games to use the psychology and the mechanics of games in a non-game context. Okay, so this isn't about games, for the purpose of engaging users and to solve problems. So again, it's not about games. It can be, you can apply games, you can use games, but the true gamification, pure gamification, doesn't even necessarily have to feel like a game. So for instance, just to lay a groundwork for games, what types of games did you play as a child? So think all the way back to childhood. What games did you play as a child? And post those up in the message bar there. Hey, we got sorry right off the bat. Probably did it so you could say sorry. Connect 4, Battleship, Scrabble, all of the above. Clue, yeah. Labyrinth, Pac-Man. These are going through quickly, so I might miss yours. Monopoly, Scrabble, Operation. Yeah, that was an interesting one, wasn't it? Did you know there was an actual game? We were always just playing Operation. Battleship, Atari, good. Finally, Mortal Kombat. Thanks for finally bringing in some real games here. Mousetrap, Scrabble, good. Now, when you think about those games and keep them coming in, isn't it true that you liked certain games, but your other people didn't? Okay, there's certain games you're attracted to, but other ones you weren't. So when you're thinking about the games, you can keep them coming up here because it's always fun to see what other people were interested in. Risk, there we go, finally, thank you. It's a long formatted game versus Mousetrap, which is a quick game. When you think about it, what made that fun for you? Okay, so we had some Scrabble up there. There's probably some folks that did not find Scrabble as fun. So if you, good Parcheesi, if you entered in, you could still have a chance, enter in the game, you get the player badge. All right, take a picture, draw a picture, write it down, keep track of it. Again, there's my email address. Let me know how you've gone through, how many you collected. Thinking about the games that we played and what made them fun for us, what can we deconstruct, what can we pull out of there and apply to games? Yeah, there was, Julie just said, I like the social aspect of games. Now, why this becomes important and why we need to bring this into the workplace is because of what we call the G generation, the gamers. And this is the new normal. So the gamers, that we call it, like I said, the G generation is over 56 million strong in the U.S. And so it starts with all the way back to Gen Xers, so 1965 to 1981, millennials, of course, and now the Gen Zens, people born after 2001. As they enter the workforce, they have a new expectation when it comes to learning, comes to development, and so on. And they're moving up through the ranks. They're becoming managers, partners, of course, CEOs. And chances are that you will be managed by the G generation at some point. So as they continue to grow in numbers, they're changing how business is done because of who they are, how they grew up, and how they see the world and how they go after what they want. So it's changed how we do things. So to give a quick little background of gamification, there's what's called outward facing. So if you think of marketing, sales, bringing customers in, so facing outward toward our customers. There's social gamification, like getting people to take their medication, recycle, and so on. And then what we're focusing on here is internal gamification. So working with our employees, maybe our current customers, and so on. But if we look outward at some examples that are out there so that we see what we can be familiar with, there's this one. McDonald's runs this little campaign every once in a while. And sure, they have a picture of a game with Monopoly. They spend a lot of money licensing that. But really what the game itself is about collecting different things, scratch offs and so on. And you know how it works. You get there and you buy something and you get a little scratch off and you're all excited because you could win, where's the money on there? $100,000 or a brand new car. But what you probably get is an extra larger soda, some extra fries or someone. But when McDonald's runs this campaign once a year and it only runs for a short period of time, which is important to gamification, their profits go up significantly for that month. So this is important. It's getting people to buy more bad food. But you might, double click there. You might be more familiar with the one on the right there. This is not mine example, but well, here I'll use it. It's very, very current. When it comes to levels, when loyalty programs and ramping up, this becomes very, very important. So for instance, I'm one short with Southwest for the year. And so I'm flying, we're based in Austin, Texas. I'm flying to Houston, Texas on December 31st, all right? Because it was cheaper than flying to Dallas. I'm flying over there. Then that's where I decided to spend New Year's, all right? To get that last flight in. But the point is they're getting us to do things that we don't want to do for status. Now, in this case, with Southwest, they get the automatic A and so on. But the point is that these loyalty programs doesn't feel like a game, but it's using game mechanics to get us to level up, to buy tickets we wouldn't necessarily buy. And you might recognize that little circle there when I click too far of LinkedIn. If you noticed that you never quite can finish that circle, you're never complete. And what that does is it's driving you to give information to LinkedIn you don't necessarily want to give. You don't want to share with them your contributions and your what you do for fun and so on. They're getting you to give them more information so you can complete that little circle. So that's looking outward. That's looking outward. When you think of what we do in the learning and development community, when looking inward, what are some things that you might do? Why would you get into gamification? Why would you be interested into it? Why are you going to gamify your programs? I've just listed a few here. So fun. Maybe you have a really boring topic. Right? I was just working. We have several levels of gamification certification. So someone from our level 2, it's a mandatory compulsive program on internet security. These folks have to go through it every year. How can they make this fun? Okay, so maybe you want to make it fun. So enter in why you would do it. Okay, it doesn't have to be these. It could be your own. Like Norina says, breaking down fears, building teamwork, encouraging folks to apply what they've learned. Yeah, engage. That's not necessarily over there. Good. Engage, lots of engaging, all the above. Say skill development. Yeah, there's lots of applications for gamification. Decrease onboarding time, increasing retention material, keeping them involved, and so on. Great. You guys are doing great, putting all these in. Keep people coming back. That'd be great. Yeah, I want to take sexual harassment training, retention. All right. So if you entered in something there and you keep them coming in, guess what? You just got the creative contributor badge. Brag about the course to others. Wouldn't that be great? There's the badge. Encourage thought. Yeah, through gamification, get them involved. Good. So again, there's my email. Keep track of it. Take a picture, screenshot, whatever it takes. And you just got this badge as well. Okay. When we look at it, we know there's lots of reasons why we can use gamification, but how do we do it? And that's where we bring in our 5 trademarked proven system, and it wraps around the acronym of games. And I'm going to unpack this for a little bit for you. But games, the process is we first want a goal. Where are we going? What are we going to do? Why are we doing gamification in the first place? Then we want to create a sense of adventure. So we want to put some adventure around it so that we can create some excitement. A method, how's it going to be delivered? So lots of folks here, and we have full companies listening in on the webinar here, full teams. I'm sorry, not the whole company, just some teams. So maybe you're doing a lot of online versus instructor-led, some sort of virtual blended. So what's the method, engagement, and then finally sync it up. Okay, so here's what we have in our system. This is for the level 1 gamification certification. So this is the map that we will be using when we're there in Portland, when Monica Cornetti's in Portland there giving this certification. And so you'll see that there are 5 different colors here. So the G, the goals, is down there in the bottom left with the orange color, and then the A, the adventures, and the yellow. Then the light green is method, the dark green is engagement, and then the sync it up, the S, is up there in the blue where we get into prototyping and everything. So the 5 are there, but there's 6 stepping stones to each. All right, so there's a lot that could be covered, more certainly than we can do in the next few minutes. But I want to touch on each of these so you have a takeaway. And specifically in the first section down there at the bottom left is who will be playing. And this is an important concept where when we get to mistakes, we'll cover this again. But oftentimes what happens is we create learning experiences that we enjoy. Something here that we call self-hugging. Dr. Stephen Reese, I'll introduce you briefly to his work here in just a few seconds. But he said, not only do we think everybody should be like us, but that they are like us. And this is where we end up creating experiences that we enjoy. So going back to those games we played as children, I was going through the list. It was going by pretty quickly. I didn't see the game of life. I was looking for it. I didn't see it. If you typed it in, good for you. But my sister loved the game of life. She just always wanted to play it, always bargaining with me to play it. She'd play it 3 times in a row. And meanwhile, I hated it. okay, because there was no way to actually beat, to win, to strategize, to get ahead of her. There was this stupid little spinner. I'd spin it, so that was all there was. There was no mystery. There was no excitement. I'd read down through to all the. I could read the board and see what was going on. Had these silly little cars. You put little pink and blue things inside the car. Not very interesting for me. I didn't like the game. It didn't engage me like it did her. My game at that time was Othello. Othello. I love the tagline. A minute to learn, a lifetime to master. All right. So this is a great tagline, but there was strategy. You had to really think through things and think ahead. For those of you, if you were into chess or something like that, Go is like super duper Othello. But I was I nerded out on Othello so much, and there's no one to play with because I was so good. I ended up playing myself and getting all these great strategies and so on. So the point is, it's not a right or wrong thing, but if I were to create a gamified program for my sister who likes life, I wouldn't have the elements, the mechanics that she would enjoy. Same thing, she would create an experience that felt like life, very safe, not a lot of surprises, not a lot of strategy, no clear winners, and then that would tend to turn me off. And this is using this example when it comes to the experiences we create for other people. So what we use, we use the Reese Motivation Profile. Dr. Stephen Reese, I just mentioned his name. He created the first empirically based taxonomy of human needs and desires. All right, so I love using big freaky words like that. But anyway, huge data set. The original data set was over 80,000 people and cultures across 4 countries. And the idea was what motivates people. And so it came down to this 16 that you can see there on the screen. And when someone's on the far right, on the blue side, they put more emphasis on those, and people who are on the blue put less emphasis than the middle 60%. So those vertical lines, what's in yellow, that's 60% of the data set. What we find is that when people go through our programs, curiosity, the third one, they tend to be on the high side. Okay, so everybody that goes through a level 2 gamification certification goes through this profile so that we can see where our blind spots are. So, because remember, we develop for ourselves. So everybody goes through it so they can see their blind spots. Well, I would suggest that if you're here by yourself, okay, if you're a team, maybe someone drug you to this, that you would also be on the high side of curious. Like I said, we've only had, I started to say I didn't complete, had 3 people in our going through our programs who are low curiosity. 2 of those had to take it because their bosses told them to. And the third one, she was brand new to the L&D community and was just ramping up the fastest way she could. So let's say you're taking your lunch hour to listen to me ramble on. And so let's say you're on the high side of curious. What that would mean is that you would create training programs that you enjoy. Meanwhile, most of the population does not enjoy information and learning as much as you do. So just to give you this little statistic, it's a few years old, but probably still true. 42% of American college graduates, okay, so they're graduating from college, 42% of American college graduates will never read another nonfiction book the rest of their lives. Once they graduate, that's the last time they will read a nonfiction book. All right. You've probably read a couple this year. All right. So when you're thinking about this, this is our audiences. We are creating learning experiences that might be uncomfortable for other people. So gamification, we should always begin with creating what we call a player profile or a learner persona. And so how do you, like I said, we use the Reese Motivation Profile, but you and your organization, you probably have ways that you also learn about your folks. So in the chat bar, how do you get to know your learners? How do you have assessments? Do you have interviews? Do you have surveys? And I realize some of you are just way too busy and overwhelmed, or you have the relationship. If that's your case, you could type in too busy. All right. So we have behavior style analysis, interviews, experience. Yeah. Focus group. Yeah. Good. Interviews, surveys, tech, course. Don't. Good. Thanks for being honest. Double points for you. All right. Course feedback, user testing, teach standard. Yeah, green belt. Good, good. Pure learn. Okay. Good. Keep them coming in. Talk with management. Yeah, folks who are actually down in the trenches. Good. We got a disc finally. Pre-tests. Good. Student data. Keep them coming. And if you, even if you're honest, you said we don't have any, you still get the player-centric design badge because you know that that's where you will be headed. All right. So questionnaires and so on. So it's important, though, what the point I'm making here is we need to understand them so we can develop learning programs, learning experiences that are comfortable for them, not for us, but for them. That's that level. Let's move up to the next level here, and this is where the fun starts to begin. And that's where to create an adventure. And this becomes very, very important when we're creating experiences. So adventure, specifically storytelling, because humans, it turns out, that's how we're wired. If you think back, thousands and thousands of years, I mean, millions of years, that's how we communicated and passed along information from generation to generation was via story. Professionally, I'm putting together a whole series on this, doing a presentation just before Portland for a group of folks, and this is what we're focusing on, is why story is so important for how information moves from generation to generation. Turns out we're wired for this. There's cool things that are going on in the brain when we hear a story. So just to give you some examples of what we've done here at Sententia, one of our first programs was this one, Snow White and Payroll Law. All right, I don't know if you've ever had to go through, if we have HR people on here, so on, if you've ever gone through a payroll law class, and it can get boring. And so these folks brought in Monica Cornetti. They had this lawyer drop, this brutal program, and so they gave her the task of making it so people would actually want to go to their programs, because these were public seminars they were offering. And so just imagine this. You go and you're expecting a whole day of EEOC, all those acronyms and everything. And she comes up and has this big witch's hat on, holds out an apple and says, "Why is payroll law like a poison apple?" And the idea is you don't want to get audited and fined and all those wonderful things. So throughout the day, wrapped around this concept, this narrative of Snow White. Now, Snow White is in the public domain. You can use Snow White, but it turns out that Disney owns the dwarves. So she didn't have any dwarves, but they did have characters. So they had Dopey Dan. He's the boss's son. We're not really sure what he does. He's probably misclassified. There was Grumpy Gus. He's grumpy because he's been divorced 3 times, and so that's where they discuss wage garnishment. The Woodsman, this is a few years ago. This was back when the IRS was really cranking down on 1099 employees. They still are, but it was a big push for a few years there. And so the question comes up, is the Woodsman a 1099 employee, a contract employee, or should he be hired? Because the Queen was very, very specific about the what she wanted him to do. He had to lure Snow White into the woods and then take a dagger and carve her heart out and bring back the heart, because it's a children's story, and bring back the heart. So then the question comes, does he do this for other evil queens? Does he advertise in the woods? And so on. So using this narrative, this story, now people have a mental trigger that they can remember, they can attach the information to. This ancient grandma's grammar, I mentioned grammar earlier, so I gamified this one. The basic idea, the narrative is that grandma loves grammar, and she also makes cookies. And so this program has 2 dueling economies inside of it. So throughout the day, people collect cookies, and then there's also boss points. And so boss points when things have changed, and they like the cookies. Well, the problem is if you do something new and different, like if you only put 1 space after the period, you lose cookies. You get a boss point, but you lose cookies. So that's where we have it. Seen at Star Trek. Good comments. And then another example, we didn't actually use Inside Out for this one, but it was this is Mafeking University in South Africa. And we have this up here because we talk about how do you come up with ideas. Don't begin with this a blank page. But the onboarding process for the new instructors, they have a name for them, I'm blanking on it right now, they're coming in to teach at the university, they weren't following through on all the paperwork they had to do. And the university needed that paperwork to get funding from the government. And so how to get folks to go through when it's really just about procrastination, overwhelm, resistance to paperwork, and so on. So taking these characters, we didn't use these, we had the students actually designed characters that made more sense to them culturally. And but the idea that we have things inside of our heads that prevent us from doing what we want to do, what needs to get done. So there's lots of places we can look for stories and examples and ideas. So I want you to start thinking about adding adventure to your programs, because again, our brains are hardwired to story. So storytelling promotes emotional engagement that creates a positive outcome in the workplace. And so this is where we really want to pay attention to this. And like I said, there's some great research out there right now. So looking at the clock, seeing what our time is. Good. All right. So Larry's saying good parents get their kids to do things in the same way. Yeah, make it a game and add some adventure to it. Okay, so what we do is we look through down here, we go through all the stories. Now we come up to the method section in what we call Pirates Pete's Tavern here. And here is where we add in the activities. One of the things we like to say is learning begins when the instructor shuts up. All right. So it's important that we're not just lecturing anymore. We want to get rid of the dry, boring lectures. What we want to do is get them involved in learning. And so specifically, we look at this square and it's creating the right mix of learning activities. Now you're already probably adding in activities to your learning and so on, and that's great. But I want to demonstrate how this works. Okay. So when you think about adding in activities. So we're going to have an activity here right on the screen. So if you're out there checking your email, playing Angry Birds or whatever you're doing, this is a good time to check back in on the screen. And what's going to happen is on the next slide, there's going to be a bunch of numbers on the slide. Okay, so they're randomized numbers. Well, not randomized, but placed throughout the slide. During the 60 seconds, okay, you're going to have 60 seconds. What you're going to do is you're going to find the number 1, then find number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and so on. So you're going to ramp up, see how many numbers you can count, you can find in the 60 seconds, starting with 1 and going forward. All right, are you ready? Looking at the screen, keeping track here, and begin. Keep track of it for yourself, Robert. Stop. Write down, not on the screen. You can put it, just keep on track, piece of paper, because we've got a little bit more we're going to do with this. But the number that you reached, okay, so just write that down somewhere, keep track of it. Because what we're going to do is we're going to add in a method that, let's call it a teaching tool, that will make this a little easier for you. Okay, so right now you're having to find all those numbers. But now what we're going to do is we're going to put in a method, if you will, that will help you through the process. So same thing, it'll be, oops, why am I doing that? Sorry. Cheating. All right. Should hit the screen forward. So anyway, I'm going to put up the screen here and then we'll help you find it a little quicker. So same thing, you'll find 1, you'll find 2, and so on. So we'll go through the process, put 60 seconds back on, and here we go. You ready? one, find two, and so on. And stop. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Hopefully that number's higher than the previous number. If it is, put it above the other one and subtract. Okay, subtract, and let's see what the difference is. Okay, see what the difference is if you improved. And go ahead and post that up. What's your improvement level? So if you played along, guess what? You get a badge, of course. So here comes your badge. Move into mastery badge. But the idea is it became easier to go through the process with those lines, and that's what we want to think about when it comes to creating learning experiences. What activities can we use that will make it easier for them to succeed? And as another lesson, you always want to little space like that in your webinar so that you can take a drink of coffee and some water. All right, you can put it on mute. But the point is that we to add in activities instead of just lecturing the whole way so that folks can get involved. And so that's the third level. Give yourself that badge. Again, there's my email. Keep track of how many you have. And let's move on to the fourth one here. And this is where we finally get to gamification. The problem is, adding game mechanics. Let me pause there. So adding game mechanics. Where most organizations fail, people fail when it comes to gamification as they jump right into this spot. We need to first lay the groundwork, go through all these steps before we get here. Because if we do, otherwise we're just going to throw a bunch of game mechanics that might not be successful. We don't know what our people want. We don't know what's going to work because, first of all, we don't know why we're doing it in the first place. So it's important to understand we have to lay the groundwork before we can actually add the game mechanics. So here's the thing, folks. There are over 300 game mechanics. So folks in the game design world, not all of them will work in our learning programs. I think I've identified about 120 that we can use. But the point is, less is more. All right. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. What game mechanics will they enjoy? What works for them? So yes, there's plenty more than just points, badges, and leaderboards, but what works for them. So that's why in level 1, what we do is we have 16 that we believe are the most effective that we can use in our learning programs. And then there's others that we share that you have the ability to then start to lay down in your program. And the goal is this, folks, to line it up with the motivation that our folks have. What is it that they enjoy? What is it that they want to engage in? And so you don't want to just use a mechanic just because you enjoy it. You want to use it because they enjoy it. The point is, in our process, we want to take what motivates them and find a mechanic that triggers that. So we don't want to just throw up a mechanics in there. We want to make sure that it has a reason for being there. So just because you enjoy it doesn't mean it needs to be there. All right, so that's this one. And now let's get to the final level. And this is where we sync it all up. We bring everything together here at the very, very top. We want it to be cohesive. We don't want 5 different storylines going on. We want there to be a purpose, a reason for everything. And then making sure it works as a whole, and then go ahead and prototype, play test it, and eventually ask, is it fun? Is it fun? So I want you to pause right now and to think about your programs, okay? Because I want to take, this is all nice theory. Like I said, I've been moving through it quickly, so we need a memory trigger. So when you're thinking about your organization, what's on your plate, I want you to write down, not in the chat bar. This is just for you. Okay, this is just for you, for your memory purposes, to make this practical for you, is to write down, jot down on a piece of paper on the screen somewhere. What's a program that you could apply gamification to? It's suffering. It could use a little bit of a push. It's maybe a little boring. You're not getting completion rates or so on. So I want you to think of something practical and specific that you could begin to apply gamification to. Okay, so this is on your hand washing procedures. Yeah, so this is for you. And so I want you to think about this, take this information, apply it. And if you do that, and I'm going to have to trust you on this one, you get the talent development ace. Okay, so if you can identify something that you would apply gamification to, give yourself that badge. As I was going through this and laying down the 5 levels, and it seems like a lot of information, and you're like, boy, this is going to take a lot of work, or it's going to cost a lot of money. And it's most people, when they think of gamification, think that it is expensive. They're thinking of the time commitment, the testing, the implementation. And of course, gamification can be costly, because once we get into technology, the prices go up. But when it compared to other types of training, it doesn't have to be that much more expensive than what you're already doing. Okay, so where it gets expensive is when we mess up, when it is not effective. Because if you're going to go through all this effort, all this time, all this money to create this program, and then it's not effective, then you've wasted your time, you've wasted your money. So that's why I want to touch on the 4 major mistakes to avoid. All right, so 4 major mistakes to avoid. And the first one is failing to answer why the heck we're doing it in the first place. We need clear objectives when it comes to gamification. The nice thing about it is we can have precise goals. We can now get feedback that says, yes, learning is happening, that says they have achieved it. So we can get some good feedback loops, but we need to know what it is we want to achieve in the first place. You'd be surprised how often companies will come to us and we'll say, well, what is it that you want to achieve? And they'll be like, we just want better teamwork. All right. Well, that's great, but how will we know that we've achieved that? We need to make sure that we have very, very clear objectives and know why we're doing it. Okay, so the next costly mistake is failing to identify who is playing your game. Again, becomes very, very important. I stressed it earlier, is when we look at our motivation profile, and if we're always creating for us, then we run into issues. I know that some of you are saying things like, you don't understand, I create training for 20,000 people. No, we find the majority. Okay, so who are the personas? Who can we design for? Okay, and that's what we want to target. Because one of the things that I always say is, if we design for everyone, we design for ourselves. We end up just designing for ourselves. So who is out there? Who's going to be our players? And we design for them. And then the next one, of course, is trying to fix something that's just broken. All right. So if your training, if your process, your business process, if the basic core underlying process sucks, there's nothing gamification can do for you. It will be a little easier maybe for you. It might be a little more engaging, but if the program is messed up, we can't make it better. Just putting paint on this car will not improve it. And then finally, the 4th big mistake that folks run into is thinking that PBLs stands for points, badges, leaderboards. Points, badges, leaderboards. There's so much more. Remember, there's over 300 mechanics, but too often folks say, oh yeah, we got some badges where we gamified it, or here's some leaderboards and we got some points over here. You'll get LMSs will do this a lot, and they'll say, yeah, we're fully gamified. We got a badge and point system. No, there's tons more that we can use. Again, going through this profile represents a typical profile from folks going through our level 2 program. But across the board, our folks, if you go all the way down there to the bottom, are low vengeance as a motivator. Okay, so the desire to win, to conquer, and so on, tend to be low. Up until the last cohort, there was only 5 of us who had ever been high vengeance, me being one of them, and my best friend, not my best friend, but a good friend of mine, Rob, being the second one. And so the point is leaderboards do not work for this population. I would bet that leaderboards would not motivate you. Okay, that you would not sit there and say, who's number one? I'm going to conquer that person. I'm going to rip them down. I'm going to sabotage them, make sure they can't get to work then tomorrow. I'm going to slash their tires and so on so I can be number one. That might not be what's motivating you. So Mark is asking points, badges, leaderboards, PBLs, points, badges, leaderboards. So remember, there's at least 100 other mechanics that you can use. All right. So we want to make sure that we place it for them and to tie it all back around. So I wanted to give a good summary of what we've looked at here. So first of all, you have a clear understanding of what gamification can achieve for you. Okay, so you've thought about what you're looking at, what you're working on. I went through the 5 essential steps for developing a successful gamification program, and you got that practical method for applying it to your organization. That's why I wanted you to focus on something that you can use, and went through those 4 costly mistakes to avoid when planning. Liz, just really quickly, yes, this is being recorded and it'll be available to everyone. Okay, so the 4 costly mistakes, and you're learning and you've decided and identified that you want to create a gamified strategy for your program, Because see, you've been on this webinar with me, you've been engaged, you've demonstrated that you're serious about gamification and creating engaging learning experiences. You want your folks to be involved. And I want to acknowledge you for staying with me, dealing with the technology issues and so on, because you're doing what most people in our industry don't do. And that is you're working to improve your knowledge and your skills. You're thinking about how you can improve and dedicated to creating better learning experiences. And so now that you have a theoretical grasp of gamification, you might want to take it to the application level. Okay, so theory is one thing, applying it is a whole other thing. And to actually apply gamification to a training program for your organization. And so that's why you're perfect for the level 1 gamification certification that will be hosted by Cascadia ATD on January 19. Let me make sure I have everything correct here. Officially, we'll start at 9 o'clock, but we do want you coming in, registering by 8:30, just because, oh, by the way, Portland has traffic, right? So we want to make sure we get started on time. This program was specially designed for people like you who want to deliver engaging training that gets results. So let me show you Nick, introduce you to Nick. Oh, Nick disappeared. All right. So anyway, Nick will be your guide for the program. You'll see a picture of him a little later. This is the only gamification certification specifically for talent development, talent management professionals that is recognized by HRCI, SHRM, and ATD for recertification credits. So just to keep that in mind, it is 6 contact hours. So we will you will have those contact hours. And more importantly, perhaps, if you earned at least 4 badges today and you register for a level 1 certification, your name will be entered to win those 2 hours from Monica Cornetti. And the other thing I need to mention is we are limited on space for this program, especially noticing how many of you are engaged in this webinar. I believe there's only space for 21 folks at the for the certification. So when go to the website there, tdcascadia.org, get signed up. I believe you can see Nick now. Finally, there's Nick. He's your avatar guide for level 1, and of course Monica will be there as well, and I will be as well, be joining us also, because that's what I like to do when we go to fun places like the Pacific Northwest. I want to like I said, I'll stay on the call here. A lot of you got your questions in already. We'll keep the recording going, so if you do have to get off, you can come back for the recording and reach out, be in touch with all of us here. So like I said, you have my email address, and thanks, Liz. Yes, put the full link right there on the for the event. Otherwise, you go to events on the tdcascadia.org. And it sounds like a marketing thing because I am from the marketing area and the whole scarcity thing, but I am serious that being limited to 21, when I see such an active group here, space is limited. and also, we have a couple people that we want to bring as well. So I guess we'll be standing in the back because there won't be a chair for us. So anyway, excited to be coming to Oregon. It's kind of my roots, and hopefully we'll see you in a few weeks. All right. So we'll call that the official end because it's almost to the top of the hour. If you want to stay with me, I'm scrolling back for questions. Question: how do you learn differences between live and online? So it's very, very fascinating. So Larry asked this, especially when it comes to gamification. When you think of story, it's easier to create an avatar, a guide inside of online because that's what we expect. That's what we're used to. It takes a little bit more work on the live side of things, and then how good of a sense of humor do you have when it comes to it? Could you, like Monica, put a big witch's hat on and feel comfortable wearing a witch's hat all day? That depends. So there's things we can do on both sides, especially when it comes to gamification. People think of the online experience, and it's true. It's easier to write in certain things, but we also have the expense. The downside of online learning is the distance. We don't feel engaged. We can't see each other. And I know I'm still an adjunct professor at UNLV. I only teach online, and so I'm grading papers today. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to go do a little mountain bike and then grade some papers. But the point is that I've been teaching online since 2003. I am not as engaged with my students as I am in a live classroom, and so that's an issue when it comes to the difference. There's some strategies to ensure. Sarah's asking about strategies is making sure gamification is inclusive. And there's, and again, a big question. It's not easily answered, but let me scroll back. Inclusive and accessible to diverse learners. And this, what we have to be really careful with inside the L&D community, especially when it comes to competition. And a lot of game mechanics, of course, are wrapped around competition. More importantly, Sarah, some work that Monica, South by Southwest is a big deal here in Austin. And so Monica held a panel last year at South by Southwest with two other leading ladies in gamification. And the title was Rethink the Pink. And here's the concept is this: if stereotypically young men are designing gamification, and so they're creating programs that would drive toward that stereotypical young male, and they were engaged. Meanwhile, stereotypically female audience, especially young ladies, might play differently, interact differently. And if your job is based on the metrics that's coming out of these gamified programs that are skewed towards, like I said, stereotypically generalized might be a better way to say it, a generalized audience, what does that mean for different folks? So there has been some issue. We have been looking at it. There's not the idea is we have to be careful or be very, very aware of it, which Sarah, you already are. Okay, so be careful. Again, going back to self-hugging, who are we designing for is what we have to look at. Kent, I'm all the way back, so if you guys are responding to these, I'll have to cycle back, but I'm afraid of losing some things. Common assessments for gaming programs. Kent, I'm going to take a little more thought on that. I don't know if you're still on the line. So a game mechanic, I'll say this just briefly, game mechanics should do one of two things. And for the first one is to either trigger an action or to give feedback on the action. And so there's a lot of, inside of mechanics, a lot of ways that we can create feedback loops so that that's where the assessment can come into play. Did they successfully create this loop? So when they get the badge, again, to use the easiest is talking about badges and so on. Now we know that they've done the extra effort, that they've done something. So they've leveled up, they've gotten their points and so on. So there's certain, we always, like I said, With a mechanic, we want to either have it act as a trigger to get people involved, to say, hey, we're about to play a game, or to create a feedback loop inside of there. So it depends on the mechanic. Recording is going to be available. I'm starting to catch up here. So, clean. I was asking how small or how minute a performance improvement opportunity is gamification not well suited. And that's where ultimately it comes down to the business objective that comes out of it. So what is it that we're wanting? Is it worth our time to have a small if it's something that's very, very small, it doesn't make sense for us to dedicate a lot of effort and time to create a gamified system or process by which we will for the outcome. And so it really comes down to business goals, business objectives. And ultimately, that's where we hurt ourselves in the L&D community, is we don't keep track of the business objectives. We're focused on learning, information, change, and so on, and we don't consider the costs versus the outcomes. Andrew, if you run into a situation where your training program was trashed for being too childish for adults, yeah, and that's our fear early on, and especially when it comes to instructor-led training. If we're designing for someone else to deliver, we have to be very careful with that, because that makes some people uncomfortable. So it is a design element. A lot of times our recommendation is, if you feel like that's where you're going, to start with gamification light, if you will, and then be able to weave and to carry it forward. And so it really depends on the program, the learners, and the interaction. So for instance, like you saw, we have a avatar, Nick, and walks through it. It's pirate themed. There's some things that we've done that in the beginning we thought, oh, this will be fun, this will be cool, and then people weren't interacting with it, especially on the instructor-led side of things, and then it became a distraction. So we would pull it back. Certain other elements we're starting to add back in to see how can we make this more fun. Does it feel too childish? So try it. One of the great things about with gamification, what I learned from game design, is iteration is part of design. So try it. If it comes across too childish, you're not getting the interaction, the pull that you want, then you can always withdraw it. You can add more in. But yeah, there is that risk of coming across that way. So we can add mechanics that don't necessarily have to feel like we're just playing, going back to basic loyalty programs. All right, did I miss anything? If I missed your question, bring it back. Oh, the good thing on the recording is it records me consistently all the way through. So if I disappeared for you, I will be back there on the recording, and I will edit some of the things out. Okay, folks, I think I got everything. I'm just scrolling through. And studies, oh, here's one. Yeah, the audience rank on the scale I showed, like on the profile, personas, but you can look up player persona, buyer persona, learner persona, and there's a lot of discussion about the different things. Because of our familiarity with the Reese profile, we can generalize around it. And there's certain techniques that we use internally and with our customers. It's not like it's a secret, but when it comes to creating personas, it's important to realize these are not everybody. They are politically incorrect. You're stereotyping. Not all Gen Xers are, or not all millennials, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so whatever your generalization. But when we're creating a persona, then we can generalize about that population group. And that's what we do, because our goal is to create programs for the middle 60%. It's the old saying that 20% will love your training programs no matter what you do. They're going to love it and have a good time. 20% will just hate it no matter what you do. And it's that middle 60 that we want to design for, because we'll always have the outliers. And so when we think about Stereotypically, people who go into the learning and development community, who succeed at the learning and development community, are going to be grinders. A lot of you are still on the program with me live. Those of you listening to the recording, you're still with me at this point in the recording. So we can generalize, we can stereotype based on those activities. I believe it came back on vengeance. Vengeance was a surprise for me. And that only came from data. It's not something I would have thought about. It's not something that I could look at, but that was actual data that we were collecting from our when we'd go through the profiles through the programs. And so that was interesting, and mostly because it's a blind spot of mine. I just assumed everybody was like me and wanted to play games to win. I didn't understand that a lot of people don't, that play for the social reasons. They don't care about winning. Like somebody had Risk up there earlier. That's an example of someone who's high vengeance. And that was something I would not have anticipated. So that one came from actual data. And when we create our internal personas, we make certain stereotypes about the population, the learning and development community. Scott's asking, have any studies have been done to measure increased learning outcomes before and after gamification? Yes, and especially if you want to get on want to nerd out on it, a lot of work coming out of Europe, the universities in Europe. There was just a call yesterday for GameFin in Finland. Finland? That seems like pretty far north for it, but somewhere up there, I guess so. And it's very, very academic, the studies coming out of it. And so it's great. We need to grab more of those for our audience that's interested, but showing clear outcomes before and after. And on the academic level, it's been fascinating. If you want to read scientific papers on it, or scholarly papers, I guess would be, well, they're scientific because they're actually using it. So short of huge science, there's short of something like that, there's a lot of anecdotal. Here's our program completions before, here's completions afterward. We're hoping to be involved in a process for how many cicerones, people wanting to be beer experts. And this is a good Oregon Northwest thing to talk about. They want to be to go on and become cicerones, and there's only a 30% pass rate for the test. And so this gamification program that would help people study for the test. So hopefully that'll come out in 2018. That'd be a really interesting, because the bar is so low, 30% completion rate. Could we have, if people going through the program, if they got to 80%, what would the value of that be? so there's those kinds of not quite studies, but for individual programs that are out there. Large audiences, how do you determine a profile? Yeah, especially this one, when it's compliance training, where it's going out to a whole organization. And so ideally what we do, and so this was, who's working on this? It seems like it's a Northwest thing. I think it was in Oregon. I think it was Southern Oregon company. And what they do is, because they have internal, so the folks like management, administrators, and then the folks who are actually in the shop, in the manufacturers. And so inside of their compliance training, what's cool is you actually self-identify which route you want to go. And then so inside of there, they're able to create different experiences based on where you work. And so I thought that was interesting, and even how they handled it. So it's not to say we're the workers, we're the people to sit at the computers. Instead, you chose an avatar that was your guide. And so that was fascinating. But yeah, it's tough when it's a large audience. Why this company? But we can create, we don't need, how to say this, we can have multiple learner personas, and to make sure we address those. So who are the groups going through our programs? Yeah, Mary, don't just start to play around with it. That's the nice thing about gamification, is we can try it, we can apply it, and we don't have to go all in. All right, folks, like I said, hope to see you. And if we if certification is something you want to do and we run out of time, by all means, stay in touch and we can bring it back around. All right. So have a good rest of your day, folks. And I'm going to head out and get some mountain biking in. Thanks, everyone.